For 38 years, I built something from nothing. That's not a figure of speech. I literally started with nothing. A rented basement space on Elgin Street in Ottawa, 2 folding tables, and a display case I bought second-hand from a jewelry store that had gone under. My mother thought I was making a terrible mistake. My husband Gerald said he supported me, though I noticed he never once mentioned it to his colleagues at the firm. The clinic was mine. Every certificate on the wall, every piece of equipment, every one of the 12 staff members I'd hired and trained mine. Westgate Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation had become one of the most respected private clinics in the Ottawa Valley. We'd expanded twice. We had a satellite location in Canada. We had a waiting list. And on a Tuesday morning in late October, I sat across from a lawyer at a firm on Spark Street and signed papers that sold it all for $2.8 million. I remember the exact weight of the pen in my hand. I remember the way the sunlight came through the window and landed on the signature line. I had worked for this moment since I was 26 years old. My eyes were dry. I had promised myself they would be, but my hands were shaking slightly, and the lawyer, a kind woman named Susan, pretended not to notice. When I walked out onto the street, the October air hit me like cold water, and I stood there on the sidewalk for a full minute just breathing. 38 years. $2.8 million. I was 63 years old, and for the first time since Gerald and I had gotten married, I felt completely, entirely free. And all I wanted in that moment was to tell him. That's the part I still think about. That's the part that keeps me up sometimes, not with grief anymore, but with a kind of bewildered tenderness for the woman I was that Tuesday morning, so happy, so full, so absolutely certain that the person she loved most would want to hear her news. Gerald's firm was on Metcalfe Street, 12 minutes from where I was standing. He was a senior partner at a mid-sized accounting firm, the kind of place that had dark wood paneling in the lobby and framed photos of charitable golf tournaments on the walls. I had been to his office dozens of times over the years. I knew which elevator to take, which receptionist to wave to, how to walk past the assistant's desk, with just enough confidence that no one stopped you. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise him. I was still wearing my good coat, the navy wool one I'd bought for the signing. I had my hair done that morning. I remember thinking, walking through the lobby, that I must have looked like a woman with good news, because the security guard smiled at me in a way that felt like he could see it on my face. The elevator opened on the 4th floor. I turned left down the hallway toward Gerald's corner office. His door was slightly open, which was unusual. He was particular about his door, always kept it shut when he was on a call or with a client. Through the gap, I could hear 2 voices, low and warm. A woman laughing at something, and then Gerald's voice saying something I couldn't quite make out, but with a softness in it, an intimacy, that I had not heard him use with me in a very long time. I stopped walking. I don't know how long I stood in that hallway. It could have been 10 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. I stood there and I listened to my husband laugh with a woman behind his mostly closed office door, and something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. I did not open the door. I turned around. I walked back down the hallway, past the assistant's desk, past the receptionist who waved, into the elevator. I pressed the lobby button. I watched the numbers count down. And I thought, with a clarity that frightened me, I have known this for a long time. I just didn't let myself know it. Outside on Metcalfe Street, I stood in the October wind, and I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring the way she always does. "Mum, how did the signing go?" I said, "The signing went perfectly. Can I come over?" Something in my voice must have told her. She said, "I'll put the kettle on." My daughter lives in Barhaven, 20 minutes from downtown with no traffic. I drove there on autopilot, not crying, not shaking, just thinking. By the time I pulled into her driveway, I had already decided 2 things. The first was that I was not going to do anything rash. The second was that I needed information before I did anything at all. She met me at the door. She took one look at my face and hugged me, and I let her, standing in the doorway in my navy coat, and it was only then that I allowed myself to feel at the full weight of what I suspected, the specific loneliness of a woman who has just realized that the happiest day of her professional life has been hollowed out by something she cannot yet name. I told her what I had heard, not the laughing exactly, but the tone of it, the door, the particular quietness of Gerald's voice. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mum, How long have you actually suspected this? I wrapped my hands around my mug. I said, longer than I've admitted. She nodded. She didn't push. She is her mother's daughter. I drove home that afternoon with a plan, or the beginning of one. I was not going to confront Gerald, not yet. I had spent 38 years building something carefully and methodically, and I was not about to let emotion undo the careful work of a single Tuesday morning. What I needed first was the truth. And what I needed second was a lawyer, a different kind of lawyer than the one I had just seen on Spark Street. I have a friend, Carol, who is a retired family court judge. We have known each other since our children were in the same French immersion class at Churchill back in 1994. I called her from my car before I even pulled out of my daughter's driveway. She picked up immediately. I said, Carol, if I suspect my husband has been having an affair, what is the very first thing I should do? There was a pause. Then she said, you document everything. And you call a family lawyer before you say a single word to him, not after, before. I said, okay. She said, Margaret, how long? I said, I don't know yet. She gave me the name of a lawyer she trusted. I wrote it down on the back of a gas receipt I found in my console. And then I went home, and I made dinner, and I sat across from Gerald at the kitchen table we had bought together at a place in Westboro 20 years ago, and I said nothing. I watched his face. I listened to the way he talked about his day, a client meeting, a filing deadline, something about the office renovation. I watched for the places where the story went smooth and practiced, the way lies go when they've been told more than once. There were several. I slept on my side of the bed with my eyes open for a long time that night. Over the following 2 weeks, I did what Carol had told me to do. I paid attention. I looked at things I had trained myself not to look at. The dry cleaning that came back with a receipt from a cleaner near Gloucester, nowhere near Gerald's office or our house. The evenings he stayed late 3, sometimes 4 times a week, and came home with the particular smell of cold air on his coat that meant he had been outside somewhere, not just in his office. The way his phone was always face down on the table now, where it used to sit face up. I am a physiotherapist. For 38 years, I have made my living by reading bodies, by watching the way a person holds their shoulder, guards their lower back, compensates for a pain they haven't yet acknowledged. I know what avoidance looks like in a body. I had simply refused, until now, to apply that knowledge to my own home. I met with the family lawyer, her name was Rebecca, and she had an office near the Rideau Center on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after the signing. I told her what I suspected. I told her about the clinic, the sale, the money sitting in a corporate account. She listened carefully, took notes, and then she told me several things I needed to hear. She told me that in Ontario, the proceeds from the sale of a business that I had founded before our marriage would likely be treated differently than marital assets, particularly if I could demonstrate clear ownership history. She told me I should not move money, hide money, or make any large financial decisions without her guidance. She told me I should document the current state of our joint accounts, our property, our investments quietly, carefully, without alerting Gerald. And then she said, "Has he asked about the sale?" I said, "I haven't told him yet." She looked at me steadily. "Keep it that way for now." I drove home from that meeting with something I hadn't felt in 2 weeks, a sense of solid ground under my feet. I was not going to be reckless. I was not going to be blindsided. Whatever came next, I was going to walk through it with my eyes open. It was Gerald who forced the timeline. 3 days after my meeting with Rebecca, he came home early, which was unusual enough that I noticed it immediately, and sat down at the kitchen table with a look on his face that I recognized from 36 years of marriage. It was the look he wore when he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. He said, "Margaret, I need to tell you something." I sat down across from him. I folded my hands on the table. I said nothing. He talked for a long time. Her name was Diane. She was 41 years old, and she worked in the contracts department at his firm. It had started 2 years ago at a conference in Toronto. He said it wasn't what I thought, which is something I have since learned that every person in his position says, as though there is some other category of thing it could be. He said he had been trying to end it. He said he was sorry. He said the word sorry 4 times in the first 5 minutes, and each time he said it I could feel it landing with less weight, like a word being worn down by overuse. I let him finish. Then I said, "Gerald, Thank you for telling me. He looked surprised. I think he had expected tears or shouting or both. He said, Margaret. I said, I need a few days. I'm going to go stay with our daughter. He started to say something else. I stood up and I went upstairs, and I packed a bag with the methodical calmness of a woman who has been preparing for something she didn't fully admit she was preparing for. I took my important documents from the filing cabinet in the study, the ones Rebecca had told me to gather. My passport, my financial records, the sale documents from the clinic. I took my mother's jewelry from the box in the closet. I carried my bag downstairs. Gerald was still sitting at the kitchen table. He looked smaller than I remembered him looking. I said, I'll be in touch. And I walked out the door. My daughter had been expecting the call. She had the guest room ready. She didn't ask me to talk about it. She ordered Thai food from a place in Barhaven that we both like, and we sat on her couch and watched a program neither of us paid attention to. And around 10 o'clock she said, He doesn't know about the clinic sale yet. Does he? I said no. She nodded slowly. Good. Over the following weeks I let Rebecca do what she was trained to do. There were conversations, and then there were lawyers' conversations, and then there were the particular silences that exist between two people who have shared a life for 36 years and are now in the process of dividing it. Gerald hired his own lawyer, a man named Paul who was thorough and professional and, I suspect, somewhat embarrassed by his client. The question of the clinic came up, as it had to. Gerald's position, through Paul, was that the growth of the clinic over the course of our marriage represented a marital asset, that his support, his emotional support, as the paperwork carefully phrased it, had contributed to that growth, and that he was entitled to a portion of the sale proceeds. Rebecca had anticipated this. She had documents going back to 1987. She had the original lease on the Elgin Street basement. She had my grandfather's loan, the one that had given me the starting capital before Gerald and I had even met, a fact I had mentioned to him once, years ago, and which he had apparently filed away and forgotten. She had 38 years of evidence that this had been mine, built by my hands, before he and I had ever signed anything together. I will not say it was simple. It wasn't. There were months of back and forth, and there were nights when I lay in my daughter's guest room and stared at the ceiling and felt the full particular exhaustion of a woman who is simultaneously grieving a marriage and fighting for what she built. Both things were true at the same time. I had loved Gerald. I did love Gerald, in the way you love someone who has been woven into the fabric of your life for decades, even after you learn that they are not who you needed them to be. That kind of love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. But I did not confuse grief with weakness, and I did not confuse love with the willingness to give away what I had earned. The settlement was finalized in the spring. The clinic proceeds remained mine, protected by the documentation Rebecca had built, and by the simple, undeniable fact that I had started it before Gerald was ever part of my story. We divided the marital assets cleanly: the house in Nepean, the investment account, the cottage on the Rideau that I had always loved more than he had anyway. Gerald got more than I would have liked. That is the nature of a settlement. But he did not get the clinic. I bought a condo in the Glebe in May. 3rd floor, south-facing windows, a small balcony where I have a container garden that my daughter helped me plant. I can walk to the Rideau Canal from my front door. In the mornings, I make coffee and I sit on the balcony, and I watch the street come alive, and I feel something I don't have a precise word for, not happiness exactly, not relief exactly, but a kind of settled rightness, like a shoulder joint that has finally returned to its proper alignment after years of compensation. I am not going to tell you that what Gerald did didn't hurt me. It did. Some mornings it still does, in the particular quiet way that old grief arrives, not loudly, not urgently, just present, the way a scar is present. 36 years is a long time. You don't grieve a 36-year marriage the way you grieve a shorter one. You grieve it in pieces over a long time, and some of those pieces surprise you. But I want to tell you about the afternoon in early June when my daughter and my 2 grandchildren came over to the condo for the first time. My grandson, who is 7, ran straight to the balcony and pressed his nose against the glass door and said, "Grandma, you can see the whole street from here." My granddaughter, who is 4, sat on the kitchen floor and asked if she could help unpack the box of kitchen things, and spent 45 minutes very seriously placing wooden spoons into a drawer. I stood in my kitchen in my home, paid for with money I had earned over 38 years of work, and I watched my grandchildren make themselves at home in my new life, and I thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. Later, after the children were in the car and my daughter was hugging me goodbye at the door, she said, "You look good, Mum. You really do." I said, "I feel good." She held my face in her hands for a moment, the way I used to hold hers when she was small. She said, "You know what I keep thinking? You found out on the best day of your life. You signed those papers and then you went to tell him, and instead you found out. And it was awful, but you found out before you let him into that chapter." I thought about the navy coat, the sunlight on the signature line, the weight of the pen. I said, "I think you're right." She kissed my cheek and went to her car, and I stood in my doorway and watched her drive away. And then I went back inside and made myself a cup of tea and sat on my balcony in the June evening air, 63 years old and entirely, completely free. The canal was catching the last of the light. A couple was walking along the path below with a dog pulling at the leash. A cyclist went by. The city was doing what cities do in the evening, settling into itself, softening at the edges. I had signed those papers to close one chapter. I had not known, walking out of that office on Spark Street, that I was also closing another one, that the same Tuesday would end two things and begin one. But it did. And whatever comes next, I face it with everything I built, intact, in my own name, on my own terms. That has always been enough for me. It still is.